program operator this week, and that will be launched next month, and it will be more focused on the interface between the corporates and startups. So it's called venture client model. That's also what's in the pipeline and coming up. And all these activities are most likely going to be present in the startup house when we get started there.
How can one learn about these projects?
Nordic Startup School, they have their own website, and the program is already running. So next batch is in the fall. There are different, let's say, channels where we advertise them, and hopefully as many see them as possible. If there is a feeling that the marketing is not done in a good way, we are more than happy to hear the feedback and try to find the best channels for that.
And let me remind our listeners that interviews with the current participants of the Nordic Startup School will appear in the podcast episodes. And by participants, I mean both startups and mentors who take part in the project. I know that one of the spheres of your expertise is funding. Could you please give a few advice where a startup should look for funds?
Well, we are probably out of time before if I really start to talk about that, because I've been actually giving lectures of a half a day regarding that topic. I think the main point really is that regarding the funding, that you should be, as a founder, you should be very careful when you think about getting the external funding, because you really don't want to dilute your own ownership in the company too early. And I see that quite often happening here in Finland, that the first seed and A-round investors get already such a big stake in the company that the founders, even if there is a good positive outcome, meaning someone buys the company with a good valuation, the founders may not really get that much of the company, especially compared to the amount of work they put in there.
Okay, thank you very much for the interview, Tapio. That was Tapio Siik from Business Tampere, and now we're moving to the next interview of this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Sebastian, and please tell our listeners a few things about your background.
Hey, thank you so much. Great being here at Tampere and Tribe Tampere meeting. Seeing your premises and meeting you. Yeah, I'm a growth strategist nowadays at a Helsinki-based growth agency called Truly Agency. I have a history in marketing from my education as well as a working life for the last decade, I would say. Since half a year, I've been working very closely with a lot of startups, helping them grow, mostly with marketing in the digital environment, not excluding anything in terms of what comes to offline media, let's say, or any other measures, anything that has to do with growth marketing and growth hacking and the philosophy behind that. So,
okay, let's start from the beginning. What is understood under growth hacking?
Growth hacking. Many understand it as a big buzzword that doesn't really mean a lot of things to me. I've come to learn it more as the philosophy of doing things. And, it's more about how things are done, not necessarily by a strict set of rules, but it's about rapid experimentation and trying to do whatever you can and being resilient about the measures and tactics you use, going from one thing to another and scaling those that work in order to, build growth, constant growth, and not giving up on that. Moving to the next thing when one thing is identified as a non-scalable tactic for the purpose of scaling your business and building growth, basically. So I see it more as in the back of the head, the way you do things and the philosophy of it.
Okay, I will ruin your philosophical mood and ask a very practical question.
All right, go ahead.
Let's imagine we have an early stage startup.
Uh-huh.
Is it better for the team to have someone in charge of growth hacking from inside, like taking a marketing person from very beginning to the team?
Yeah.
Or is it better to hire a professional? How does it work from your perspective?
A very good question. Depends on the skill set that you have in-house, I would say, and on your resources and willingness to experiment, things, if it's within the domain of marketing or scaling a business. I mean, that should be at the back of everyone's head who's ever involved with the startup and working for it, whether as a founder or employee, but there's not a definitive answer to that. So if you can do it by yourself, and if you have history, let's say, in those kinds of tactics, by all means, do everything you can and never stop doing it and go hard. But oftentimes companies, no matter whether startup scale-ups or corporations, can oftentimes and most of the time benefit from an objective viewpoint, an outsider's viewpoint, who have histories working with tens, if not hundreds of companies in different domains. So as oftentimes you work with mentors and different advisors from various disciplines, marketing and sales is something that you can benefit definitely from if you have an outsider helping you with that. Whether you do it by hand in-house or kind of outsource it to an agency like Truly Agency, depends on your resources and what you see as the things that you should focus on.
Okay, since you work with lots of startups, as far as I understood, your main clients are startups.
I would say most of our clientele nowadays are startups or scale-ups, yeah.
In your opinion, what's the main challenge for a startup that stops them from, becoming big and great?
Well,
why don't we have an Nokia?
Yeah, I don't know. Why doesn't each and every entrepreneur succeed? I think it's north of 90% that startups eventually fail, and there are multiple reasons why that happens, and there's been a bunch of studies conducted also to find out reasons. Oftentimes the product is not ready, whether it's a good or a service. Well, if it's a startup, it's most likely a service that has the potential to scale. It's trying to be maybe sold before it's actually in a state where people are willing to pay for it, I would say. So when you apply growth hacking to it, you can, try to sell it directly, but the philosophy works, of course, obviously into the product as well. So you need to hack it and find out what do you need to iterate about it in order for it to come up with a solution to an existing problem. And after that, it should find traction somewhere at least.
Basically, what are your criteria when you choose which startup to work with?
Well, we have to see potential in it. That's the one thing. So we start with a straight-on, transparent discussion about how their business outlook is currently and what are the growth objectives for them in the future. And we have the expertise to see, if there is potential for us to actually deliver some results in relation to those objectives. And obviously, you should have resources enough to be able to invest in marketing efforts. As said, they should be investments, not costs, that bring in also positive results. Those two things, I would say. You have to have at least something to invest, which might be tricky at times, and you might feel, it being a risk, but it's an investment. And secondarily, after our kind of audit of how we see the business being able to scale, those two things I would raise up. And then after that, it's just a matter of testing. And that's what growth marketing and growth hacking is about. We are living in a new economy in the digital world, and there are so many uncertainties. We might not always know for certain what will work and what will not work, but the whole idea is there that we should take a naive kind of standpoint and build our tactics and what do we do on hypotheses that are argued for based on something at least, and then just go in and test it with a low threshold, small budgets. And once we get that traction and see what brings in sustainable growth that drives us towards our bigger objectives, then that's the place to scale. And then it should be no problem anymore, to bring in more resources to build on that scalability because it's sustainable.
Okay, I think I got your point. I know that you have a background in corporate life, work, whatever.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's the main difference between working in a corporate system versus working in a startup?
Well, this is two completely different worlds, I would say. So
which one is better?
Both have their place in the world. And I know many people are fed up with the corporate world and how things are done there. And that's maybe partly the reason that I want to see, how marketing is conducted in a fast-paced environment such as the startup world where, you don't have indefinite runway. You have to find a way to grow on, or unless you will not exist anymore, and then you have to move on to the next thing. I did work for a very large global marketing communications corporation for 9 years before I started a Truly Agency. The biggest difference is that then you maybe had much more time to plan things out, and you already had some history of how those goods or services are marketed. So you had validated kind of theories of how things will work, which is a big difference to, let's say, this new economy where rapid technological development is creating whole new businesses and service models and business models and so forth. So there might not be a history or a background or understanding of how you kind of can do measures of growth for these businesses. That's one thing. And secondarily, it's much more fast-paced, obviously. A big difference is the philosophy and how the company structures, business structures and organizations are built. So here we are talking with smaller organizations, with entrepreneurs themselves and investors even. So it's much more straightforward and transparent talk, whereas talking with marketing heads, managers and directors, you have to take time to kind of make sure that they know exactly what we plan on doing, because they have to sell the ideas also within their own organization and get someone to agree with that. So it's a lot of bureaucracy and things that, and such work that it's not actually producing results. So for the entrepreneurial mind, they tend to find themselves, in these startup environments, because you can actually execute things quite rapidly and be free of all the unnecessities that you don't really want to spend your time on.
Thank you very much for being with us today, Sebastian. And I know that it's your first visit to Tribe Tampere premises.
That's right.
And a reminder for our listeners that Tribe Tampere is for now situated in Pieninkatu 47, aka P47 co-working space. So please come visit. The working hours are 9 to 5. Do you believe that, okay, let's put it this way. Why do startups tend to cooperate in some kind of networking and co-working spaces, in your opinion?
Well, you're a social animal and you have ideas, and you have to share those ideas and get feedback. That's just, I think, the natural way to do. And obviously you are drawn to people who think like you because they inspire you as well. They understand you, basically. I mean, it's great that, startup hubs are popping up here and there, and like Tribe Tampere exists and has the facilities to feed that, because people need to talk to each other. That's how this world, revolves, and it's the natural evolution.
So you generally believe that networking platforms like Tribe Tampere are useful for startups?
For sure. I mean, I think it's strong evidence that people come here, they frequent here, and they come back here. So that's your product market fit and validation, I would say, already. I mean, it's clear evidence that there's a demand for such a service.
There is usually this contradiction or difference between something which happens in Helsinki and something which happens outside of Helsinki. Do you think it's still useful to have local startup communities, or should everybody move to Helsinki?
No, I don't think everyone should move to Helsinki. I myself moved to Helsinki I was born and grew up very close to Tampere, and Tampere is close to my heart as well. I've spent tons of time in Tampere and I'm right now here. So we recently went to Oulu for polar bear pitching. That was a couple of weeks ago, and visited one startup hub there as well and got to know it, just like I am now doing here in Tribe Tampere. And every place kind of, I feel, has their own atmosphere, and the people are a little bit somehow, different. I've noticed the difference being that whenever I'm in Helsinki, it's the fastest paced place, I would say, and the people, you sense it from the people as well. But I would not wish for everyone to bring their businesses right away to Helsinki. I think you can grow them, especially as so many are scalable digital businesses, so it doesn't really matter where you are. But to have different kind of communities in different geographical locations, I think is a bonus, and that still does not mean that you cannot socialize with people all over the globe, because we have all the technology and the means to do so. So it's not about the physical geographical location anymore, and I think it will be less and less so in the future. So we have means of finding the people we need also online and so forth. With that being said, I think there is still a role for face-to-face meetings, as we are now having, and having a real being in the same place at the same time. But that doesn't mean that all startups should be in one place. I would imagine making the whole scene a little bit more homogeneous, which is not something that I think is necessary. I mean, it's good that there exists some differences, because that can bring up different types of features in both people as well as products, whether they be goods and services, and then finally the businesses that offers them to the market.
All right. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
This was Tribecast episode 11, and my name is Marina. Let me remind you that Tribecast Tre is an independent media working in a close cooperation with Tribecast community. Let me remind you that Tribecast is an independent media working in a close cooperation with Tribe Tampere community. And nowadays you can not only listen to us online, but also follow us on Twitter. By the way, any feedback is always welcome. This was all for this week. I hope you enjoyed this weekend. Next week I'll get you more cool interviews with more interesting people. Stay warm and tuned.